A person can spend 20 years chasing money and lose everything in a single second to a memory. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. Waiters moved silently between tables carrying silver trays. A string quartet played near the stage while New York's wealthiest guests discussed investments, acquisitions, and numbers so large they no longer felt real. I stood near the entrance of the gallery holding a stack of event programs, trying not to spill coffee on anyone worth more than the building itself. My name is Chloe Parker, and until that night, the most exciting part of my job was explaining modern art to confused tourists. The annual charity auction was supposed to be simple: smile, hand out programs, help guests find their seats, go home. Instead, it became the night everything changed. Across the room, Dominic Romano sat at the head table surrounded by executives, attorneys, and advisors. Even if someone had never heard his name before, they would have noticed him immediately. He carried himself differently, calm, controlled, like a man accustomed to making decisions that changed lives. Rumor said he was one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. Rumor said many things. I had never met him and never expected to. A giant screen displayed figures related to an upcoming business agreement. People around him looked excited, nervous. The deal was apparently worth millions. Cameras waited nearby. Reporters stood ready. Everything had been carefully planned. Then one small accident ruined the schedule. Or maybe it fulfilled it. I was carrying a folder toward a guest when someone bumped into my shoulder. Papers slipped from my hands and scattered across the polished floor. Oh no! I immediately knelt to gather them. Embarrassment burned through me as several pages slid farther away. I reached for one. My sleeve slipped backward. Just for a moment. Barely a second. Long enough for the birthmark on the inside of my wrist to become visible beneath the ballroom lights. I did not think anything of it. I had seen the mark my entire life. A small crescent-shaped birthmark near my wrist. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. At least that was what I believed. Then the room changed. I sensed it before I understood it. Conversation slowed. Someone near the head table stopped speaking mid-sentence. I looked up. Dominic Romano was staring directly at me. Not casually. Not politely. Staring. His expression had gone completely still. The pen in his hand slipped from his fingers and rolled across the tablecloth. Around him, several executives exchanged confused glances. One man continued talking about projections and contracts. Dominic did not seem to hear a word. His eyes remained fixed on my wrist. For a moment, I wondered if I had spilled something on myself. Then I quickly pulled my sleeve back down. The strange spell seemed to break. Dominic stood abruptly. Chairs shifted. Conversation stopped entirely. The room watched. One of his advisors hurried over. "Sir, the signing begins in 5 minutes. Dominic never looked away from me. "Cancel it." The advisor blinked. "Cancel what?" "The meeting." Silence spread through the ballroom. The advisor looked genuinely confused. "The agreement is worth $12 million. Dominic finally turned toward him. His voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it. Something shaken. I said cancel it. Then his gaze found me again, and for the first time in my life, I felt as though a complete stranger recognized something about me that I did not know myself. For the rest of the evening, I could feel his eyes finding me. Not constantly. Not obviously. Yet every time I glanced toward the head table, Dominic Romano seemed to be looking in my direction. The canceled meeting became the only thing anyone talked about. Guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses. Executives checked their phones repeatedly. Reporters looked frustrated. Nobody seemed to understand what had happened, including me. By the time the event finally ended, my feet hurt and my head was full of questions. Outside, Manhattan glittered beneath a cool spring night. Yellow taxis flowed through traffic. Streetlights reflected against glass towers stretching into the darkness. Normally, I loved walking through the city after work. That night I felt uneasy, as though something invisible had shifted around me. "You are thinking about him." The voice belonged to Madison, my coworker and closest friend at the gallery. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder and smiled knowingly. "I am thinking about why a billionaire canceled a $12 million deal because he saw somebody drop papers." Madison laughed. "You noticed that too?" The entire room noticed. We began walking toward the subway entrance. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. Then Madison glanced toward me. There was something strange about the way he looked at you. I immediately remembered that moment. The silence. The dropped pen. The expression on his face. Not anger. Not attraction. Something closer to recognition. I know. Madison hesitated. Do you know him? No. Ever met him before? Never. Yet even as I answered, uncertainty lingered in my mind. Because his reaction had not looked like someone meeting a stranger. It looked like someone seeing a ghost. Later that night, I stood alone in my apartment bathroom brushing my teeth when my eyes drifted toward the mirror. Slowly, I rolled up my sleeve and stared at the birthmark on my wrist. A small crescent shape. Pale against my skin. Nothing remarkable. At least that was what I had always believed. My adoptive parents certainly never treated it as important. Growing up, I barely thought about it. Yet now I could not stop looking at it. I laughed quietly at myself. You are being ridiculous, Chloe. A birthmark was just a birthmark. Nothing more. The next morning, life returned to normal. Or at least it tried to. Visitors filled the gallery. Deliveries arrived.
Phones rang.
Art collectors asked impossible questions. Everything felt ordinary again. Until shortly after lunch. Chloe. I looked up from my desk. One of the reception staff stood nearby holding a small envelope. This arrived for you. I frowned. For me. Personally addressed. Curiosity replaced confusion. I accepted the envelope and turned it over. No return address. No company logo. Just my name written in elegant handwriting. Carefully I opened it. Inside was a single card. My breath caught immediately. The message contained only one sentence. We need to talk about your family. No signature. No explanation. Nothing else. My pulse quickened. Family. The word alone was enough to unsettle me. My adoptive parents had passed away years earlier. I had no siblings. No known relatives. No history beyond the adoption records I received when I turned 18. Records that contained almost nothing. Everything okay? Madison asked from across the room. I folded the card quickly. Probably. The answer sounded weak even to me. Before I could think further, movement outside the gallery window caught my attention. A black luxury sedan sat across the street. The driver remained inside, watching the entrance, watching me. Then the rear passenger door opened. Dominic Romano stepped out onto the sidewalk. There are moments when life gives you a choice between walking away and finally asking the question that has been waiting for you. I stood frozen beside the gallery window while Dominic Romano crossed the street. Traffic flowed around him. People hurried along the sidewalk without realizing one of the most influential men in the city was heading directly toward a small art gallery. My pulse quickened. Across the room, Madison followed my gaze. That is him, isn't it? I nodded slowly. Apparently. The gallery door opened. A soft bell chimed overhead. Conversations seemed to fade into the background. Dominic stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit that looked tailored specifically for him. Calm. Composed. Yet there was something different about him compared to the previous night. Less control. More urgency. His eyes found me immediately. Miss Parker. His voice was measured. Respectful. Mr. Romano. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then he glanced toward the envelope still resting in my hand. The smallest shift crossed his expression. Recognition. You received a message. It was not a question. You know about it? His gaze lowered briefly. Yes. Every instinct told me I should be angry. Instead, curiosity overwhelmed everything else. Then maybe you should explain what is happening. Madison suddenly became very interested in organizing brochures on the opposite side of the room. Dominic glanced around the gallery. Would you be willing to have coffee with me? Coffee. He nodded. This conversation deserves more time than a sidewalk or a gallery floor. Normally I would have refused. But nothing about this situation felt normal anymore. 20 minutes later we sat in a quiet cafe overlooking Bryant Park. Afternoon sunlight reflected from the windows. Office workers hurried past outside carrying laptops and paper cups. The ordinary world continued moving while mine seemed to have stopped. Dominic placed a small object on the table between us. An old photograph. My eyes immediately focused on the image. A young woman stood beside a toddler near a lakeside dock. The picture looked at least 20 years old. Time had faded the colors. Yet one detail remained unmistakable. The child's wrist. A small crescent-shaped birthmark. My birthmark. I stared at the photograph without breathing. Who is she? I whispered. Dominic looked at the young woman in the image. Her name was Evelyn Hart. And the child? His jaw tightened slightly. That is what I have been trying to confirm. I looked back at the photograph. The little girl could have been anyone. Yet the birthmark felt impossible to ignore. You think that child is me? Dominic remained silent for a moment. I think there are too many coincidences. My hands trembled slightly as I returned the photograph to the table. Why did seeing my birthmark make you cancel that meeting? For the first time, genuine emotion appeared in his eyes. Not business. Not strategy. Something personal. Because 21 years ago, my mother spent months helping search for a missing child. The cafe suddenly felt much quieter. A missing child? He nodded. The girl disappeared after a boating accident on a private lake in upstate New York. My heart pounded harder. And you think she survived? I think my mother never stopped believing she did. Dominic reached into his briefcase and removed a second item. A yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline was small but clear. Local family searches for missing 3-year-old girl. Beneath the headline was a photograph. My breath caught instantly. The child in the article wore the same birthmark. Then I noticed something even stranger. Written in faded ink across the bottom of the clipping were 3 words in elegant handwriting. Find her someday. My eyes lifted toward Dominic. Who wrote that? His answer came quietly. My mother. Some discoveries do not arrive like lightning. They arrive like a crack in the foundation beneath everything you believed about yourself. I stared at the newspaper clipping while people outside the cafe continued living ordinary lives. A woman walked her dog through Bryant Park. A businessman hurried across the street carrying a briefcase. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed through midtown traffic. The entire city kept moving while my world stood perfectly still. You are saying there was a missing child? My voice sounded distant even to me. And you think I might be her? Dominic folded his hands together. I think we need facts before conclusions. His answer was careful, deliberate. Yet the fact that he had spent the last 24 hours chasing those facts told me everything. He believed there was a possibility, a real one. I looked down at the clipping again. The little girl smiled at the camera while standing beside a wooden dock. Nothing about the image suggested tragedy. Nothing suggested disappearance. She looked like any child enjoying a summer afternoon. What happened to her parents? I asked quietly. A shadow crossed Dominic's expression. The mother passed away several years later. My stomach tightened. And the father? Nobody knows. Silence settled between us. I traced the edge of the newspaper clipping with my fingertip. For most of my life, the biggest mystery I carried was a thin adoption file filled with missing pages and unanswered questions. Now a stranger was placing an entirely different history in front of me. One connected to photographs, search parties, promises. I have adoption records, I said. Very little information but some. Dominic nodded immediately. I know. I blinked. You know. Realizing what he had said, he exhaled slowly. I asked investigators to locate publicly available records after the charity event. Under normal circumstances, I would have been offended. Instead, curiosity overpowered everything else. Did they find anything? Not much. His answer came quickly. Which is exactly what concerns me. I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sunlight. Dominic reached into his briefcase once more and removed a thin folder. The paper inside looked newer than the clipping. Official. Organized. This is what my team found. I opened it carefully. The first page listed basic adoption information. My name. My adoption date. The county office responsible for processing the paperwork. Everything appeared normal until I reached the final section. Several lines had been blacked out completely. Not faded. Not damaged. Intentionally removed. Why would someone do this? I whispered. Dominic watched my reaction carefully. That is the question I have been asking all morning. The missing information bothered me more than anything else. Someone had made a choice. Someone had decided certain details should disappear forever. I turned another page. Then another. Each revealed less than the previous one. Entire sections were missing. Entire timelines erased. This does not make sense. Exactly. Dominic leaned back slightly. Adoption records usually contain gaps for privacy reasons. They do not usually contain this many. I stared through the cafe window toward the city outside. Somewhere out there was the truth. Hidden beneath paperwork and years and decisions made by people I had never met. Then something caught my eye near the bottom of the final page. A handwritten note. Barely visible. Almost overlooked. My pulse quickened. What is this? Dominic immediately leaned forward. The note contained only a few words written in fading blue ink. Transfer approved by E. Hart. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Dominic looked directly at me. Chloe. His voice had changed. The woman in that photograph was Evelyn Hart. Some secrets survive because they are hidden. Others survive because nobody is brave enough to look for them. The words on the adoption file refused to leave my mind. Transfer approved by E. Hart. I read the note again and again while the afternoon sunlight slowly shifted across the cafe table. Dominic remained silent, allowing me to process what was sitting in front of me. Evelyn Hart. The woman in the photograph. The woman connected to the missing child. The woman whose name somehow appeared inside my adoption records. This cannot be a coincidence. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Dominic nodded. I do not believe it is. I looked toward the window. Bryant Park was beginning to fill with people leaving nearby offices. Their lives seemed wonderfully uncomplicated compared to mine at that moment. If Evelyn Hart signed something connected to my adoption, then she knew me. Saying the words out loud made them feel even more real. Dominic folded his hands. That is one possibility. You think there is another? For the first time since we met, uncertainty appeared in his expression. I think we are missing part of the story. That answer bothered me because I knew he was right. Every document we had found contained fragments, photographs, notes, missing pages. Nothing complete. Nothing that explained why a child vanished and somehow ended up with an entirely different identity. Dominic reached into the folder and removed one final document. Unlike the others, this one looked older, more fragile. A photocopy of a handwritten journal page. Where did you get this? I asked. From my mother's personal records. His voice softened slightly. I found it this morning. Carefully I took the page. The handwriting was elegant and precise. The date at the top immediately caught my attention. It had been written only 3 months after the child disappeared. My eyes moved down the page. I will not stop looking. Everyone says she is gone. Everyone says I should let the family grieve and move on. But I saw the bracelet. I know what I saw. If that little girl survived, someone must find her. I felt my pulse quicken. Bracelet. The word stood out instantly. What bracelet? Dominic shook his head. I do not know yet. I continued reading. If anything ever happens to me, the evidence stays with the photograph. The mark on her wrist will matter someday. I stopped breathing. The mark on her wrist. Slowly I lowered the page. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The cafe noise faded into the background. The city disappeared. There was only that sentence. The mark on her wrist will matter someday. Your mother knew. Dominic's eyes remained fixed on the journal page. She believed the birthmark would identify the child if she was ever found. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Somewhere in the past, a woman I had never met had spent years refusing to give up on a little girl she barely knew. The thought felt strangely comforting. Then Dominic's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The moment he read the message, his posture changed. Not fear. Not shock. Recognition. What is it? I asked. He looked up slowly. One of my investigators found the retirement home where a former nurse from the adoption center lives. My heart immediately began racing. A nurse. Dominic nodded. She worked there during the exact year your adoption was processed. Hope and nervousness collided inside me. For the first time, we had something more than paper. More than theories. We had a person. Someone who might remember. Someone who might know what happened. Dominic stood and reached for his coat. Chloe. I looked up. Yes. His expression softened slightly. I think we are about to meet the woman who remembers everything. The drive north felt longer than it probably was. Autumn sunlight stretched across the highway while trees painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber. I sat in the passenger seat of Dominic's car staring out the window, watching small towns and quiet neighborhoods pass by. Neither of us spoke much. There are moments when conversation feels unnecessary. This was one of them. Both of us were thinking about the same thing. Answers. Or perhaps the possibility that answers were finally within reach. 2 hours later, we turned into the circular driveway of a retirement community overlooking a small lake. The place looked peaceful. White buildings. Carefully maintained gardens. Benches placed beneath large maple trees. It was difficult to imagine that somewhere inside this quiet place lived a woman connected to the biggest mystery of my life. Dominic parked the car and looked toward the main building. Her name is Margaret Ellis. I nodded slowly. Do you think she will remember me? The question sounded strange the moment it left my mouth. How could someone remember a child they had seen more than 20 years ago? Dominic considered the question. I think she might remember something. Inside, the building smelled faintly of coffee and fresh flowers. A receptionist greeted us warmly before leading us down a long hallway lined with photographs of local events and community gatherings. My heartbeat seemed louder with every step. Finally, we stopped outside a small sitting room overlooking the lake. An elderly woman sat beside the window knitting a blue blanket. Silver hair framed a kind face. She looked up when we entered. For several seconds she simply studied us. Then her eyes settled on me. The knitting needles stopped moving. Silence filled the room. Margaret? Dominic asked gently. The elderly woman's gaze never left my face. Good heavens. Her voice trembled slightly. It cannot be. Every nerve in my body seemed to awaken at once. Margaret slowly stood from her chair. Tears appeared in her eyes before a single question had even been asked. May I see your wrist? My breath caught. Dominic remained completely still beside me. Slowly I rolled back my sleeve. The crescent-shaped birthmark appeared beneath the afternoon light. Margaret pressed a hand against her mouth. For a moment she looked as though 20 years had vanished. I knew it, she whispered. I knew someone would find her someday. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. You know who I am? Margaret nodded through tears. I remember the day they brought you in. The room felt suddenly smaller. They. She looked toward the lake outside the window as if searching for memories across the water. You were frightened. Too young to explain anything. You kept asking for your mother. My eyes burned. I had no memories of that time. None at all. Yet hearing someone describe it made the loss feel real in a way it never had before. Margaret slowly crossed the room and sat back down. There was pressure, she said quietly. People wanted records changed. Questions stopped. Files moved. Dominic's expression sharpened immediately. Who wanted that? Margaret shook her head. I never learned the whole story. Her gaze returned to me. But I remember one thing clearly. The room became silent again. Even the distant sounds from the hallway seemed to disappear. A woman came to see you several times. My pulse quickened. Evelyn Hart. Margaret nodded. Yes. Tears filled her eyes once more. And every single visit ended the same way. I leaned forward. How? Margaret smiled sadly. She would kiss your forehead and promise that one day she would bring you home. There is a strange kind of grief that comes from learning your life may have belonged to someone else before it belonged to you. The ride back to New York felt completely different from the drive north. The highway was the same. The trees were the same. The late afternoon sun still stretched across the landscape in shades of gold. Yet everything inside me had changed. I sat quietly in the passenger seat staring at the passing scenery, while Margaret's words repeated endlessly in my mind. She would kiss your forehead and promise that one day she would bring you home. Home. The word carried a weight it never had before. For most of my life, home had been a small suburban house where my adoptive parents taught me kindness, patience, and resilience. I loved them. I always would. Nothing could change that. Yet now another story existed beside the one I had always known. Another woman. Another promise. Another life that had somehow been lost. Dominic drove in silence for nearly an hour before speaking. "You are thinking about Evelyn." I looked out the window. How could I not? He nodded. "Fair point." The city skyline appeared in the distance. Tall glass towers reflected the fading sunlight while the Hudson River shimmered beside them. Everything looked familiar again. Yet I felt like a stranger inside my own memories. "Do you think she ever stopped looking?" I asked quietly. Dominic's hands remained steady on the steering wheel. No, the certainty in his voice surprised me. "How can you be sure?" For a moment he said nothing. Then he reached into the center console and handed me a small notebook. The leather cover looked worn from years of use. This belonged to my mother. Carefully I opened it. The pages were filled with neat handwriting. Dates. Notes. Names. Observations. As I turned the pages, one thing became painfully clear. Evelyn Hart appeared again and again. Meetings. Phone calls. Searches. Investigations. Year after year. Page after page. My throat tightened. She never stopped. Dominic glanced toward me briefly. No, I continued reading until one entry near the back caught my attention. The date was only a few months before Evelyn's death. The handwriting looked slightly weaker than the earlier entries. Today Evelyn said something I will never forget. She told me that if she cannot bring the child home herself, someone else will. She said truth has a way of surviving. Tears blurred my vision. I closed the notebook carefully. Somewhere in the past, people I had never met had spent years fighting against silence. Fighting against missing records. Fighting against forgotten promises. And somehow those efforts had reached me. When we arrived in Manhattan, darkness had begun settling over the city. Dominic offered to drive me home. Normally I would have accepted. Instead, I asked him to stop near the waterfront. I needed air. Time. Space to think. We stood beside the river watching lights dance across the water. Ferries moved slowly through the harbor. A cool breeze carried the scent of salt and autumn leaves. "What happens now?" I asked. Dominic looked toward the skyline. "Now we keep looking." His answer felt simple. Honest. I nodded slowly. Then my phone vibrated. A new email notification appeared on the screen. Sender unknown. Subject line. Evelyn Hart. My heart immediately began racing. Dominic noticed my expression. "What is it?" I opened the message. There was no text. No explanation. Only a single attachment. An old scanned letter. At the bottom of the document, just above the signature, were 6 words that made my breath catch completely. "If you find her, tell Chloe." Some letters carry information. Others carry the weight of an entire lifetime. My hands trembled as I opened the attachment beside the river. The city. Lights reflected across the dark water while ferries moved silently through the harbor. Dominic stood beside me without speaking. Neither of us seemed willing to interrupt whatever was about to unfold. The scanned document appeared on my screen. The paper was old. Slightly yellowed. Fold marks crossed the center. Yet the handwriting remained clear. Elegant. Careful. Personal. I swallowed hard and began reading. "If you are reading this, then someone finally found her." The world around me disappeared. The sounds of traffic faded. The river vanished. There was only the letter. Only the words left behind by a woman I had never met, but who somehow felt closer with every page. I do not know how many years will pass before the truth finds its way back to her. I only know that it must. I promised myself I would never stop looking. Tears filled my eyes. Dominic remained silent beside me. I continued reading. The little girl deserves a life free from fear and secrets. If she grows up believing she was abandoned, tell her that is not true. Tell her she was loved every single day. Tell her that some of us spent years trying to bring her home. My vision blurred. For most of my life, I had carried questions without answers. Why had I been given away? Why did my records contain so many missing pieces? Why did nobody ever come looking for me? Now, sentence by sentence, those beliefs were beginning to crack apart. I reached the final page. The signature at the bottom read simply, Evelyn Hart. Beneath it was a second note written later in different ink. If Chloe is alive, there is one place she must see. My pulse quickened immediately. Below the sentence was an address. Not in New York. Not far from the lake where the child had disappeared. Dominic leaned closer. What is it? I turned the screen toward him. He read the address twice. Recognition flashed across his face. I know this place. You do. He nodded slowly. My mother owned a small property near there. The realization hung between us. Another connection. Another thread tying everything together. What is at the address now? I asked. Dominic looked back toward the river. I am not sure. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Neither of us slept much. By sunrise, we were already heading north again. The drive felt different this time. Less uncertainty. More purpose. The address led us to a quiet lakeside community surrounded by tall pines and calm water. Autumn leaves covered the ground in shades of red and gold. Eventually the road ended near a small white cottage overlooking the lake. My heart immediately began racing. It was beautiful, simple, peaceful, as if time had forgotten it existed. Dominic parked the car. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then I noticed something hanging beside the front door. A wooden plaque. Faded by years of weather. My breath caught instantly. Carved into the wood were two words. Heart Cottage. Emotion crashed through me so suddenly I had to grip the door handle. Dominic stared at the sign. Neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something else. Tucked beneath the plaque was a small metal mailbox. Inside waited a single key, and an envelope with my name written across the front in the same elegant handwriting from the letter. Sometimes the longest journey in a person's life is not measured in miles. It is measured in truths finally allowed to come home. My hands trembled as I lifted the envelope from the mailbox. The paper looked impossibly ordinary. White. Slightly aged. Sealed decades ago by someone who never knew whether I would one day stand exactly where I was standing. The lake shimmered behind the cottage. Autumn leaves drifted across the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called from the trees. The world felt quiet enough to hear a memory breathe. Dominic stood beside me without speaking. He understood that this moment belonged to me. Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter and a small photograph. The photograph showed a young woman sitting on the porch of the cottage. Eveline Hart. She looked almost exactly as I imagined she would. Kind eyes. Gentle smile. The kind of face that made people feel safe. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Then I unfolded the letter. Chloe, if you are reading this, then life has been kinder to us than I ever dared hope. Tears immediately filled my eyes. The handwriting matched the letter from before. Every word felt personal. Every sentence felt alive. I kept reading. There are many things I wish I could explain. Many questions I wish I could answer myself. But if you are standing here, then you already know the most important truth. You were never forgotten. You were never unwanted. You were loved from the first day I met you until the last day of my life. I pressed a hand against my mouth. Years of uncertainty seemed to loosen inside me. Questions that had followed me since childhood suddenly felt lighter. Not because I knew everything, but because I finally knew that I had mattered to someone. The letter continued. I kept searching because promises matter. Especially promises made to children. If I failed to bring you home, I hoped someone else would finish the journey for me. My eyes drifted toward Dominic. He was standing near the porch looking out across the lake. For a moment I thought about the charity gala, the canceled meeting, the photograph, the investigations, every step that had led us here. Evelyn's final words filled the remainder of the page. Do not spend your life mourning what was lost. Spend it celebrating what was found. Family is not only the people who begin your story. Family is also the people who help you continue it. Love them well. The signature beneath the message was simple. Eveline Hart. I lowered the letter slowly. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the lake in ribbons of gold. Everything felt different. Not solved. Not perfect. But whole. Dominic walked toward me. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I looked at the letter one final time before folding it carefully. I think I am. A small smile appeared on his face. Good. We spent the next hour exploring the cottage. Inside we found photographs, journals, and small pieces of a life preserved through time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing shocking. Just evidence of a woman who never stopped hoping. When the sun began to set, we stepped back outside. The sky glowed orange above the water. What happens now? Dominic asked. I thought about the question. For days I had been chasing answers. Now, standing beside the lake, I realized something important. The search was never really about discovering who I used to be. It was about understanding who I could become. Now, I said softly, I live my life. Dominic nodded. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere behind us, the cottage stood quietly against the fading light. Ahead of us, the future waited. For the first time, it did not feel empty. It felt open. As we walked back toward the car, I glanced once more at the crescent-shaped birthmark on my wrist. The same mark that had changed everything. The same mark that carried a story longer than I ever imagined. And in that moment, I finally understood something Evelyn had known all along. The smallest signs often lead us home.